as I go along, I don't have an enormous amount of content, but I would invite your questions at the end of each section, and I'll pause there so that you can see that. I have a short PowerPoint, which will kind of help to maybe outline where I'm going, focusing on principles. I'm not an expert in the sense of my MA is in this area, but my practical working knowledge of it is very good in the context in which we work. And so I'm going to use many of the disasters, about 30 of them internationally, overseas, and approximately 12 in the United States. And I've not participated in all of them. I've been an observer. I have managed a few responses in the United States, but have gone to the sites overseas often afterwards and interviewed people to learn what I could learn. So based on some personal involvement, a lot of interviews of both national folks who were there, who were recipients of help or who participated in the response. So that's kind of the basis. A little bit about me. In 1978, which is about 1,000 years ago, I was a college student and I went to Thailand for a summer, and I worked on the Thai-Lao border as a volunteer. And 2-3 days a week, we would drive out to literally to the Mekong River, and we would find groups of Hmong refugees who had just come across the river the night before. They're at the police station. The police would gather them up and they'd herd them together there, and we would provide immediate first aid, food, clothing, and then we'd let the UN camp leaders know how many people, what condition they were in, and the UN doctor know, and so they would come and then pick them up and take them to the camp, and there they would be for 9, 10, 11, 12 years. It was a real eye-opening summer. I saw firsthand the impact of war on families, particularly on women and children, and also what life in a refugee camp is like. And I would be in the camps a couple days a week doing some volunteer things there. So that was my introduction as a college student. And it was such an emotionally wrenching summer. I said I would never do this thing again, like ever. I'm done with refugee and relief response. And here I am today. I lead the relief and development arm of our denomination. So Comma Services is a faith-based organization. I'm going to share my screen for a little bit, so it'll hopefully make it easier. Here we go. Share. So we're a faith-based organization. We began a response to the Vietnam War about 50 years ago. We had people working there and starting churches and some other types of work, educational work. So we felt, I don't know, maybe a moral obligation to help. There were thousands, as you know, that fled, some overland into Cambodia, most by boats, to Thailand, to Indonesia, and to the Philippines. And we began in Thailand by just finding groups of them who'd come ashore, providing food, shelter, and then over time, Comma, along with a dozen other agencies, became a working group under the Ministry of the Interior, and then the UNHCR eventually got involved. And so we stayed involved long-term in Thailand working with refugees. Over time, whoops, I'm on the wrong slide here. I'll have to, I'm a little rusty, haven't done this for a while. There we go. So over time, we realized we needed to broaden from just immediate relief with refugees to relief and disaster response. And then in our work in Africa during famine relief, we moved into community development, recognizing that food security required a different kind of work and worker with different training and a different way of seeing the world. So we have about 70 people in 16 countries today. And we're a small organization, so we work in partnership with all kinds of folks. You can see the first slide there is our vision statement. We're committed to the transformation of the person and the restoration of the community. So we do focus on the individual or the family, and then the restoration of the community. Our mission unpacks it a little bit in terms of time, and just the obvious that relief is generally short in duration, whereas community development is years in the making. Two things that we do relief and we do development. And if you've studied NGOs that do one or the other, you may note that many of them do not do both. They focus solely on disaster relief. It's their specialty. It's what they're very good at. The Red Cross in the United States generally doesn't do community development. They have a very specific mission. You know, the hurricane comes, they come into the community, and there are certain objectives that they have. And when they're reached, they leave. And in fact, they leave rather abruptly. And that's true of other agencies, which I've observed overseas after the tsunami in 2004 in Aceh, Indonesia. That's the far northern part of the island of Sumatra. When they achieved their objectives, they pulled out of town and they were gone. So we do both. So we try to bridge between relief and development. And then the two ways that we work is through partnership and through people development. We're small, and so it's not an overstatement for me to say we don't accomplish anything apart from partnering with a local NGO, a local church, a local government agency, another NGO like us that's from the United States or Canada. So we partner very intentionally, and I'll say more about that, what's gone well, maybe what hasn't gone well, because we worked with a lot of different agencies. And then people development. In a disaster, there's not a lot of development. It's more of helping to normalize their experience, addressing trauma, basic survival. But over time, if we stay long enough, we really do move into people development. And if I keep it just within disaster response, we develop people who have a basic understanding of how to assess a disaster, how to mobilize people to help, how to set up basic logistics, purchasing, shipping, distribution. So we've had the privilege of developing people and actually organizations like ours in West Africa, in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Indonesia, and a few other locations in the Philippines. So those are two things we do. And then here's a slide I'm sure you're familiar with. It just talks about the 4 phases of response, and hopefully my cursor shows. I think we're not a first responder for the most part. We're a second responder. So we're down here toward the end of the response, but the recovery is really where we spend so much of our time and energy. And then if it has gone well and the partnerships have gone well, we move into mitigation through building capacity, training, education, setting up like basic supplies. In one country, we have these 5-gallon buckets with the 5, 6, 7 things they're going to need if there was a fire or a small flood somewhere. They could provide immediate assistance. So small things like that and some larger staging of materials. So and then one more just to help you see here. I don't know, have you seen this? Could I see some nods of head? Have you seen this slide before? Yes, no? Okay. This is helpful in understanding what people go through. And in the heroic phase, after the hurricane, or the typhoon, if you're overseas, it's probably going to be called the typhoon, or the tornado or flood. People do amazing things. I mean, it really is heroic what they do to pull together to help their community, their neighbors, or they might come from another province or state to help. And the military gets involved, big agencies from the US send people to help. And it's remarkable. And there's a little bit of a honeymoon phase where they're celebrating all that they've accomplished. And then many of those agencies leave. And then begins the long disillusionment phase where they realize it's not days, it's not weeks, it's months before we get to a place where I actually have a roof on my home, not a blue tarp, or that the well is actually going to be working and I'm not carrying water from a kilometer away or have to wait for the truck to come, a couple times a week, or whatever it is in their setting. It really hits them. And then emotionally, they are working through trauma. They are grieving all the losses, and they are many. And it is just a long, difficult place. And that's where we usually stay. And it's a hard place to be. I'll mention more about it. And then working through to the full recovery, reconstruction part. So it's just a good reminder that the media tends to focus on the heroic and the honeymoon phase, patting each other on the back. But where a lot of the hard work is done is down here in this disillusionment phase and starting to clear off the rubble, rebuild the home, rebuild the school, the church, get the wells working again, restoring the land so it can be productive, providing seeds since they lost not only their crop, but they lost their seeds. So, and I find this to be a helpful slide. And I'll stop share there. I don't know, any questions come to mind as you see that slide, or the FEMA slide with the 4 parts of the disaster response? I'm guessing you're pretty familiar with these. This is nothing new to you.
I'm curious about the second slide, not the second, the slide that came after the cycle. Where did it come from?
I think it came from the Humanitarian Disaster Institute out of Wheaton College, and they, out of their psychology department, Jamie Ayton, who's an author and a presenter, he went through Hurricane Katrina, and he's written extensively. So that's a research-based institute, and they've done a lot of work. And so I've gone to some of their training, found it very helpful, and some of the resources are online. So again, they're faith-based, but they just do really good, solid work. They worked in Japan after the hurricane there, and also the nuclear, I don't know what you call it, meltdown problem they had there. So. Yeah, well, a little bit more. Okay, here's my last comment. I'll try not to belabor this too much. So we are faith-based, and so I'm unapologetic about that. But something you need to understand if you work internationally, and that is that 85% of the world sees their life through the lens of faith, whether that's Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or Christian or some other faith. Only 15% of the world does not see their life through the lens of faith. That's the West Coast of the US, the East Coast, and Western Europe. And not a lot of disasters there that we're involved in. So I choose not to let that 15% determine how I relate to people. We've found that we need to be conversant in the language of faith in working with the imam, because he becomes part of the disaster response and helping to organize people, help us figure out where to store supplies, who are the most vulnerable in the community, or the Buddhist priest, or the Hindu leader. If there's, it might not be a temple, like in one village, he just had a little room there where a few Hindus met. The community was mostly Muslim. So relating to them through that lens of faith has been very helpful, and we develop mutual respect and understanding. So my language, I'll try not to go overboard, but just so that you know that it's where I come from. So hopefully that's enough explanation. You don't need to go any further on that. All right. Well, I've got some principles I want to mention to you. So there are 6 of them. And if you are a note taker like me, you might want to see them all. And I think I had them up there earlier. All right, Mike, that didn't work well. Let's see, how do I get back? Well, you can see me, correct? I can't see you, but the principles and practices that I have here. So I'm going to go over them, and I'm going to pause after each one, because I'd really love to see if you have any questions or comments, and maybe you've had some involvement in this as well. And let's see if I can, there we go. I got myself back to where I was. Yeah. Okay, sounds good, looks good. So we prioritize local. So I know you're working on logistics and distribution, and this all pertains to it, as I'll try to illustrate. But I would emphasize to you that relief is more about people than it is about the movement of supplies and goods and materials. As you need to spend time asking questions and listening and learning of what's going on, because it will greatly impact the effectiveness and the efficiency of what you do. And both are important because you're trying to achieve certain things. And in the background, if you hear the snorting noise, I have a French bulldog who just makes a ton of noise. And anyhow, if it gets bad, I'll put him in another room, or I'll raise him up to the screen if you need a smile because he's ugly as sin. Anyhow, but relief is really about people, and local people in a disaster. Remember, we're small. We have people in the community often, and so it's highly relational, and we take time to listen to them, understand what they've gone through, and begin to engage them in understanding and in our understanding of how do we respond to the disaster. What we are doing is two really important things. We are empowering them to be part of the solution in addressing what's happened to their community, and we are helping them to process the losses and the pain. So it is very helpful long-term to address those things. And it will also then kind of set the stage for you to work in a more effective way. You're getting their input on solutions. So we're big on local. You've got to build credibility. Even if you've come from 50 kilometers away, and particularly if you've come from another country away, you're an outsider. And you've got to have local people sponsor you there so they're going to trust you as you're responding to this disaster. Credibility is the currency that you need. They need to trust you, and you're doing that in part by gaining local knowledge of where to get things, how to do things, who knows stuff. And that just comes by interviewing people. They know the history, the area, the culture, what works and what doesn't. And you can make some big mistakes. There's probably some good papers written on what happened in Aceh in 2004, 2005, and 6. Some costly mistakes were made because people didn't bother to ask locally, and they brought the wrong kind of equipment or wrong kind of material. And then you have to end up modifying things or just tossing it away. So ask locally. Local people are very resourceful. So here's an example from Indonesia. I'll just read this paragraph here. In the early stages of one disaster response, the local people helped us secure food, water, housing, and office and warehouse space, along with trucks and distribution networks, among other things. This happened, by the way, in days, not in weeks. On another occasion, a university professor mobilized his students who distributed much needed supplies in a matter of hours. This was not only quick and efficient, but it gave the students and the professor an opportunity to serve their own people. Because you will need local supplies right away. You can't wait for the big shipment from outside the area. You have to utilize what's available locally. And that can be done through that network of relationships that are already built in the community. So we've experienced this multiple times in differing degrees, how there's already local people, local experts who can help you. You have but to ask them. And here's something I've noticed, and I've been to other parts of the world and have stayed engaged with refugee response as well. There's a great risk that your project is driven by material objectives. So there are aid agencies today that will drive into the community with a truck full of, well, whatever they're needed, literally push it out the back of the truck and drive away. And when they loaded the truck, they had 8 pallets of this, or 20 gallons, it said they've got it all written down. And when they get back, they fill in their spreadsheet that they distributed that amount. Well, I suppose you could say ultimately they provided for some basic needs, but it's very dehumanizing. People don't feel like they're being treated as a person. It's hurtful and it's a bit harmful. Whereas if you just take a little bit of time to identify some locally respected people to assist you with that distribution, it usually is much more fair and equitable and respectful. And it will make things move on much better in the future. It just takes a little bit of time. If you've never been in one of these situations where people are, maybe they're quite thirsty or they're hungry or they're frightened, they do gather, and it can get loud and it can be a little scary. But what looks like anger is really more fear. But to be that voice of calm there, and to have a local person with you, whether it's a local pastor or a local imam, people calm down and the next distribution will go better. So, but you can be driven by, in 4 days we distributed, so many thousand pounds of such and such, and yeah, so that's a real thing. People do need material help, but they need emotional and spiritual help as well. So a little bit of kindness goes a long way in distributing basic supplies, is maybe what I'm saying. It's about people. So let me pause there. I'll get a little more into some of the logistic things in a minute, but any questions you might have? It's a small class, and feel free to ask a question. Just remember to unmute yourself.
All right, so I've got a question, Mike. Were there ever any unique items that got sent and you're like, why would anybody send this? Yeah,
a well-meaning group in Canada sent like a ton of cheese to Hmong refugees in the camps, and the Hmong don't have milk product, never eat cheese. They first thought it was soap. They rubbed it on their bodies, didn't work. And it was all the foreigners who worked for the aid agencies that got a lot of cheese. So, and that's the classic example. And there are others that are pretty funny. I should have written them down. I thought about that too late. We actually collect these kinds of things because we need to laugh at ourselves at the dumb things we do sometimes. So, that's kind of costly, to ship cheese from Canada all the way to Thailand. That was not an inexpensive mistake.
Yeah, Mike, I have a comment more than a question.
Sure.
I'm involved with a medical mission that goes to Jamaica every year. I don't go every year, but I try to. And the guy that runs it's been doing this for 25 years, and I've only been involved for 10 years. So I'm not one of the drivers of this at all. But he was on me for years wanting me to go to this mission, and this is a medical mission. It's not an emergency mission.
Yeah.
And they set up a clinic for people that can't afford and don't see the doctor until we come. So, and I asked him, I finally said, Steve, what am I going to do? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a medical person. What am I going to do? And he goes, you got the most important job. He goes, you're going to help us build a relationship with the community. And I thought, whatever. He was just blowing that at me, Well, we got there, and that's exactly what he does. He's been going so long that everybody on the island knows him and they respect him. And that gets us things that no other tourist or white person would get. We go places, we see things, we get help. And it really is. He stresses every year to the newcomers that it's about relationship building. And a lot of we're in a college town, obviously, so it's a lot of college students, and they're just going for the medical, and that's it. And we're glad that's what it's built around. But anyway, I kind of concurs with what you were saying.
Yeah,
a little bit of kindness goes a long way. Respect and kindness.
In an emergency situation, the local cultures and people let you get away with a lot of things, but over time, as things return to what feels normal, their beliefs and superstitions start to supersede. And so let's say that they have this belief that you do not feed a child, an infant formula. It can only have its mother's milk or water. And so they force the child to drink water. Well, if they don't have a clean water source, child's going to die. In fact, it just happened in a clinic that we help in a remote part of West Africa. If you have a relationship with them, you can influence the way that they provide nutrition for infants just through your relationship. So it is amazing the kinds of things you can introduce once you've earned trust. So I would just highlight that. Let me move on to a rapid assessment. It's a little ironic because I said we're not a first responder, we're a second responder. So we come into the situation and Samaritan's Purse is there, International Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, and maybe there's some big NGO from the country as well, and probably the military is there. And because of knowing local language and culture, we assess there's some gaps in the response. And so we need to assess, what are those gaps and how can we help? We usually send 2 or 3 people because you need to have multiple viewpoints. And we start that process of interviewing folks locally to find out, what is not needed, what need is not being met. So we're asking a lot of questions. And the more we're involved in a country, the more we can tap people who have some experience and say, hey, we need you to go with us to this island and help with an assessment. In the United States, being a church, our denomination, we have all these districts and church pastors who help us in the community to walk around the actual neighborhoods, maybe meet the local mayor or chief of police or others and find out what's happening and what needs are still unmet. So we get there when we can, and we begin by asking, not by doing. Because a lot of people are doing the essentials thing: food, water, shelter, or security to prevent looting or other things from happening. And here's where we get into the logistics. We realize most of these agencies are going to be gone in about a month, some less. But we're going to stay. We need a place to store goods, a place for training. So we have to choose a place. Now, if there are churches there, we often will choose a church. Particularly if the community accepts that church as being a value add or not being an offensive place. But sometimes there is no church. So, the mosque, or it might not look like a mosque, but it's a local building, and it becomes the place we would store food, tarps, all kinds of things that people would need. And it's a place where the community can gather, where maybe a doctor would come in later on and where they would be treated, that kind of a place. So we're careful in choosing that one. And we do ask the community, is this a central location? Will people feel safe here? So we take some time to figure out where are we going to have our base of operations. If short-term teams are going to come, they need a place to sleep, to bathe, cook food. So you get really creative and finding places that work for that. Maybe there's multiple sites or a couple of people's homes, or you hire some people to do all the cooking, but you're creating a base of operation. You're anticipating being there months, not just a week or two. And in this time when you're assessing what's needed, you're coming up with a very simple plan, and you've got a base of operation. Let me say this now, and I hope I remind you later on. You will make mistakes in this. There's no way to avoid it. So accept up front that you'll make mistakes, and just have the attitude, I'm going to learn from them, and we're going to keep moving on. And not going to beat myself up about it, or I'm not going to be yelling at other people about it, because when you're tired and you've been going for 12 hours helping people, and somebody points out something you did wrong, you just might go off on them. You will actually, or something. So you're going to make mistakes. It just happens. The best people I know make mistakes. Here's a good one. So one of our staff members is flying into a major earthquake zone, central Java, Indonesia, which is prone to earthquakes, that country. It's right on the equator. He's got all these contacts. He's been doing this for years. He orders 1,000 mosquito nets to be sent to the area. Before he asked if mosquitoes and malaria was a problem in this part of Java, it wasn't. So 1,000 nets unneeded. Now, the rest of Indonesia has a lot of problems with mosquitoes and malaria. So yes, we found a use for them, but that was 1,000 nets he didn't need to spend money on right then. So we all make mistakes. You gather information, you make a basic plan, you implement the plan, you review it regularly, and you keep making changes to it. Having the local relationships there, and remember, you're always gaining insight and local knowledge, your plan will change. So you're talking with the military, you're talking with other NGOs. Some of those NGOs are very cooperative. Some of them function more like self-contained units. We don't need your help. We don't want your help, and have a nice day. And you're like, well, okay. but others are quite amenable to realizing you can add value to what they're doing. You have a niche or a niche that you can fill. There are church leaders, local residents, so you're putting your plan together. And you may or may not be aware of this. So you're in whether this is in the United States or anywhere in the world, people are people. There'll be some people that see an opportunity in this disaster. It's a very lucrative business, by the way. People make a lot of money off disasters, a lot of corruption. So people will try to deceive you. They'll give you wrong information. They may want to stockpile goods, figure out a way to resell it somewhere. Rather common, maybe not on a large scale, but somewhat common. So even as you're making your plan, realize that not all the information you get is reliable or credible or true. So, but again, you just have to act. So you can't wait around. Depending on your personality type and your training, you may be just fine with this what's the word I'm trying to think about? It's just an abundance of input and data, and it can paralyze some people, but you've got to act. And as you get moving, things become more clear. You realize, okay, you need to make adjustments, do less of this, more of this, but just move forward and just choose to be flexible in your thinking, your decision making. If your personality type tends toward rigidity, you might want to do a short-term mission rather than a long-term engagement in this field, because this is a time when it's controlled chaos. It's not pretty, but you are moving the ball down the field, to use that metaphor, and mistakes are being made. And next day it's like, we'll just try to do a little better and improve upon it. But you're not going to necessarily feel great about things all the time. So just a little word of warning if you have a high degree of rigidity in your personality. And another thing we do logistically, since we've been working in this field for a while, is we have funds that we have available in these various countries and here in the United States that is available immediately to people. So we start, remember, we're smaller, so we've got this $5,000 limit. You can just spend that immediately if you have to. And we usually train people, here are the things most needed in a disaster that you're probably going to spend it on. Now there's something unique to every disaster, so the list is not exhaustive. And then in that time frame, we ask them, as you are purchasing gas cards, food cards, buying water for people, whatever you're doing, or vouchers so they can go get the food themselves, be doing as much research as you can and put together a proposal for the next phase as we begin to move from the immediate into what will be sustainable. So what's a sustainable solution for potable water? What's a better way to get food to this area? You're figuring out all the time. Your plan is evolving, is what I'm saying. But we do have those funds available. We empower people to use them. To date, we've had very little misuse of funds, because while in the end we may spend, in one place we spent $500,000, but it was over months. So you're talking about smaller amounts of money delivered over months, not large chunks of money in a matter of a few weeks. So we have proposals. We require sweat equity, local people participating in their own recovery, receipts, simple bookkeeping. You really have to keep it simple. Make photocopies or just take a picture of things. So we do put simple systems in place to track the purchase, transportation, and the distribution of the things that are determined, or these folks are going to need in this particular response. So yeah, so having the money there really helps in that first week or two, because it's going to take you a while internationally even to wire money some places, because there are restrictions on how many days it takes for a wire to clear and be used. So let me pause there. Any questions you might have? So this was rapid assessment, may not be the right way to describe this category, but covered a lot of things. Anything, questions come to mind, or maybe something you have observed or participated in?
How do you know who to work with? Like, how do you have agreements set up to work with certain groups so quickly in those areas that you're responding to?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. So in countries where we've been there for 50 years or whatever, we have these built-in relationships we've nurtured. But in a new location, like a few years ago in Nepal, I don't know if you remember, there were these massive earthquakes, and the photos of them, of the sides of an entire mountain coming down, I mean, they're just dramatic. We have never worked in Nepal. The CMA is the acronym for our denomination. But we've worked with Baptists before, and we've worked with the Pentecostals before. And so we just said, we're going to find some of these local Baptist Pentecostal people and trust them that they've got contacts in the more in the interior. And there were a few business people that we knew there. And we said, we trust you. So you work with the people that you know and trust so that we can get food and building supplies to places that nobody is going to in Nepal. So it is sometimes just a handshake, but we know them well enough to say, you know, we can entrust $5,000 to them. And while I don't want to speak lightly about $5,000, it's not the end of the world, you know, if you lose that. But if they handle it well, let's do more. So in Nepal, we had just a few contacts, and these individuals, business people and others, got supplies. Sometimes they literally had to hand carry it into the villages because the main bridges were out. But yeah, we make mistakes on that. We think we have a trustworthy person, but no, they manufactured the receipts. They never actually bought the stuff, and the money ended up in their bank account, and it does happen. So that's the full disclosure. Any other questions?
You know, I asked a question in the chat. I'm just wondering, as a faith-based organization,
Yeah.
did you ever find any kind of adverse reaction to perhaps others that weren't of the same faith?
Yeah, that's a good question. Only initially, because you know, their imams or others may have said, you know, the Christians are like this, they do this, this, and this. So we try to be really careful. We're not proselytizing. So we do not require them to do anything to receive any of the things that we provide for them. So we provide for everybody in that community. And we're very careful in our talk about faith. So usually after a few weeks, that barrier comes down. Like in Guinea during the Ebola crisis, we had a local agriculturalist who also was trained as a pastor, helped us identify, here are the 5 basic needs that a village is going to need to recover after Ebola when they've lost so many people. And we went into villages where they literally burned the church, you know, like 5 years before that, because they didn't trust the Christians. So we just took it very slowly. And there's sometimes places we can't get into because, you know, Christians can behave poorly sometimes. And so regardless of whether, I'm not like that Christian group, you're painted with the same brush and you have to live with those consequences. So we try to think about those who follow us and be, you know, we don't proselytize and we seek local involvement in decision making, but every now and then it is a deal. But there's plenty of places of need we can go to. Yeah, it's a little bit of doing a dance, right? That conversation. That's a good question. Any more questions before I move on? Okay, let me move. Care for volunteers. So you've got a basic network set up, trucks coming in every few days. Your distribution is going well. You're using a basic spreadsheet. Maybe you have tablets like we did in one setting, and so people are keeping records. And the days are long, and you're watching your volunteers just kind of wear down. And by the way, I can't see the chat sheet when I'm sharing the screen, so let me stop sharing. And now I can see the chat. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, so I can see it now. Caring for your volunteers is important. Now remember, we're a small organization. We recruit volunteers, we train volunteers. We have paid people to lead a response in certain parts of the world when it was going to go 6 months or 12 months. Like in Puerto Rico, I was directly involved in the Hurricane Maria response for about 18 months, and a lot of work, and a lot of wonderful things happened, but it was really hard. So we hired a disaster coordinator full-time to manage the logistics of that. But people get worn down and they can suffer not just burnout, but PTSD, other physical symptoms. So in the course of working with volunteers, to think ahead and plan for regular informal debriefings around an evening meal, to do activities that allow people to process what they've seen, what they've heard, what they've experienced, what they're feeling, to have a day off, to talk to people about doing things like, you should take a bath because you stink, and when you get involved, the intensity of it is like, no, regular hygiene is important. Go for a walk. Are you eating good food? Encouraging them to journal if they've never journaled before. There's some simple things that help people psychologically, emotionally to manage that environment. I did not have any of that help as that summer volunteer, and I lived with some kind of awful memories for a long time that I had to process later on. I wish I'd had that help. I think I would have done better in my earlier part of my career. So anyhow, it's really important to care for them. There are formal ways to do a debrief. You can be trained as a debriefer. And if you've taken more courses in disaster or emergency management or disaster response, there's some really good training out there on how to do debriefs. There's extensive training on how to do more of the formal debrief where you're really functioning like a counselor. And then there are counselors whose expertise is in PTSD, and you may need to utilize them, particularly if you see your staff, your volunteer staff, start to act in ways that are really unhealthy and they're just not recovering. They need a break, and you need to help them take a break. So we have seen that over and over. Some cultures, let's take Indonesian culture and Filipino culture, much more communal than Americans who are very independent, or Caucasian Americans of European descent. And being together is normal, but even after a time of the intensity of the response, they wear down. And I've been in those places, and here I am, an outsider, but I'm in the same denomination, and I'm listening to their story and my hands on their shoulder. And these are really strong people. They're just sobbing, telling their story. They've been working so hard at it. And, that can be a really healthy thing. And they may be just fine after talking with you about that. But you know what? That made the beginning of something worse. So you need to pay attention to say, can they recover so that the next day they can actually go back to work, or do they need a longer break? So it is super intense. And having visited so many places, I've got these myriad of really awful memories that just pop up to the surface in a heartbeat. But it is wonderful and awful at the same time. It's one person put it, it's the most awful job that I've loved doing, because you're so involved with people. But care for those that you work with, and kind of program things in activities. There are a lot of little things I could mention there, but let me pause to say, have you had any training or experience in this where you're addressing emotional exhaustion? That's one phrase, or fatigue. PTSD is a common phrase we hear now. Any questions about that, or any ideas that you've picked up on that you found helpful? Well, if you stay involved in this, you'll become an expert in this. Let me talk about partnerships, and here's where I'll mention other agencies, because this is what makes it work for us. We're smaller. We have a few people on the ground. We have dozens of local people, nationals that we've come to know and appreciate and respect. But we know that we cannot really engage in this disaster response without partnering with Samaritan's Purse or with the military in some cases. So in Aceh, in the tsunami response, there were half a dozen like-minded organizations that came together. One had a lot of money and logistic ability to get supplies from point A to point B. Another had immediate food supplies that we could distribute through the network that we had actually built. There were aviators there, MAF. They had planes and helicopters to carry relief to remote areas. So there were people on the coastal areas easier to reach, but in the interior, not so much. And then we had seasoned workers who knew the language, culture, and they could implement a plan of action doing the least amount of harm because you're being more sensitive to culture and how you're going about things. And then the national church in Indonesia had a number of people who were willing to go there and spend a few months volunteering. And, similar skin color, they just don't look so, it's just easier to trust people who are the same nationality. So it worked together really well. I mean, it's a wonderful story. But in that same setting, there was a large organization, very well known. I'm reticent to mention their name, but because they're so anti-religion, that eventually we tried to partner with them, that it was just not going to work. So we had to part ways. And, we weren't like holding church services in the evening. They just knew that we were faith-based and that we were related to this church. The other agencies knew that as well. The government, the military knew that, and they didn't have a problem with it. But this particular Western agency really had a distinct bias, and that just is what it is. You're not going to change them or their upper level leadership. So they don't always work out. So what we've discovered is to have an initial conversation with the local leaders to say, are we agreed on why we're here? Do we have a similar sense of mission? Do we have similar values? And if we do, we write out an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. Here are the basic rules we'll work by. If we have a conflict, this is how we'll resolve it. That has been really helpful. I mean, we do have a template, but it doesn't take much to figure out an MOU. It's, why, what, and how. So that has been a good tool that we use. And it's kept us from forming, I think, some partnerships where we're going to spin our wheels or just get frustrated with each other. Better not to start the partnership. Just to respectfully agree to disagree and go your different ways. So in partnering first, and here's the thing is, we choose to partner. The bigger agencies, they have a sense of self-sufficiency. They don't really need us. They probably don't. But because we are so committed to local and language and culture, we know things they don't know. And it takes a while to convince them that we could add value to their response by guiding some of the things that they do in ways that will do less harm. When you're a small agency, you just don't have the credibility maybe, or the currency to, relational currency to convince them of that. But that is something you bump up against. And these big agencies, they don't always play well together in the sandbox. That's another thing you'll notice. Because they're all there doing their thing and they're raising a lot of money. Remember how lucrative this whole industry is? People making a lot of money, a lot of fundraising going on. Look, when a disaster hits the United States and the Red Cross, you can, they give you, text this number and you can put $10 in for this. They're making, a ton of money. So it is, yeah. It doesn't always work well. So, well, let me